He's traveled to inner places that we knew nothing about and returned with exhibits to convince the skeptical. The toughest struggle of all is to try and meld the sacred and the profane, the natural and the supernatural, this world and the next. Admit to this preoccupation, and you're in deep trouble with your church and your state. Try to make a record of it, as did St. Augustine or John of the Cross or William Blake, and you're scorned and perhaps imprisoned by your contemporaries, even if later generations regard you, without actually reading you, as a classic. Alas, I knew not this, and therefore I did weep, that God would love a worm I knew, and punish the evil foot that willfully bruised its helpless form. But that he cherished it, I never knew that, and so I wept.
Did I hear that correctly?
Exactly, yeah.
They're like reflecting just to exist in this love and this presence is absolutely delightful and worth all the pain.
Yes.
Welcome to the Subversive Orthodoxy Podcast. I'm your host, Travis Mullen, and I'm excited to have you with us. This is a podcast about philosophy and meaning. It is about how we as humans withstand the challenges of our cultures. It is about the general Judeo-Christian revelation of God in the world and how the bloodiest century ever recorded couldn't kill that revelation. It's also about how that revelation, tossed aside as archaic, outdated, and obsolete, may be the very life-giving power we need to resist this distracted techno state we're living in, full of anxiety, depression, and teenage suicide.
It's great entertainment, thrilling entertainment. It's the inside story packed with drama.
Welcome back to the Subversive Orthodoxy Podcast, Episode 5. I'm your host, Travis Mullen, and this is Part 2 on William Blake with Professor Larry and Chastity. I hope you're enjoying the podcast. There's a few ways you can interact with us. One is that you can email us questions, comments, or subjects to subversiveorthodoxy@gmail.com. You can also reach out and say hi that way. We're really enjoying the conversations, and I'm hearing from people that it's really resonating with them. And one group in the Northeast actually wants to do a call with me where we can talk about it and process it. If you haven't already and you are finding value in the podcast, please leave us a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple, and that'll help other people think it's legit. And wherever you are finding the podcast, you can do that. Please tell others who you think would appreciate it. That'd be amazing. I do foresee a really cool idea coming forward of a reading club of all the books that we are mentioning and creating like a large checklist, and it might lead to some book clubs or Zoom calls where people are getting to process it together. If you're interested in that, let us know. Without any further ado, let's get back to Episode 5, William Blake Part 2, where we pick up where we left off with the professor going about to go into the poem called The Book of Thel, which is Blake's poem processing his lost daughter through miscarriage. This poem really affected me emotionally, as you might be able to hear in my voice. And thank you for listening.
And I told you that Blake and his wife lost a child in a miscarriage. And it always plagued Blake that this happened. Blake also wrote his version of Job, in which he characterizes the comforters in terms of contemporary British people that might try to explain to you why you deserve your suffering. And so that hurt. So when he decided he was going to write an allegorical poem about why he lost a child in a miscarriage. So he imagines a unborn spirit, the spirit of his unborn child, Thel. And Thel is in heaven with all the other virgins of virgins who are afraid of being born. Now, this is Blake, who writes like this, right? This is powerful stuff. Thel doesn't want to be born. And one of the angels in charge of the virgins of the virgins, the unborn babies, is trying to tell her, you shouldn't be worried about being born. It's a wonderful place. You go down to earth and you meet clouds, and there are animals and there are people. And the unborn says, yes, but there's also death. Or his unborn child says, there's also death. And I don't want to be born just to die. And so the angel comes, and it's a great little poem. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to read a section from it.
Okay.
And so the angel says, when you're a human being, you're going to be born as a human being, and you're going to be God's immortal child, and you're going to go down to earth. And think of all the other entities you're going to meet on earth. This is like the Buddhist Jarka stories. The Madame Seraphim takes Thel down to earth and lets her meet entities who lived even shorter lives than human beings do, like the cloud and the water lily and the rainstorm. And this unborn child is allowed to talk to the cloud and the rainstorm and ask them, how is it that they can allow themselves to be created for such a short time? And then they ultimately get down to the worm in the ground. And because it's part of the old saying, we're food for worms.
Mm-hmm.
What do worms say about that? Are human beings food for worms? If so, thank you, human beings. We need the nourishment, right?
Like us talking to cows.
And then after the worms, he talks to the clod of dirt under the worm. And this is very psychedelic, but I'll just read you a couple of the unknown, the lesser known lines, and then the famous lines from this poem that you may have heard before, but didn't know that it came from Blake or that it came from the Book of Thel, which was a meditation on the loss of his child. This is the Thel talking to the water lily. And she says, "O life of this our spring, why fades the lotus of the water? Why fade children of the spring, born but to smile and fall? Thel is like a watery bow and like a parting cloud, like a reflection in a glass." Now notice the imagery here. This is world-class stuff, like Shakespearean almost, like shadows in the water, like dreams of infants, like a smile upon an infant's face, like the dove's voice, like transient day, like music in the air. Ah, gentle may I lay me down, and gentle rest my head, and gentle sleep the sleep of death, and gentle hear the voice of him that walketh in the garden in the evening time. And then the lily of the valley answers and says, in this prayer, the lily of the valley, breathing in the humble grass, answered the lovely maid and said, I am a watery weed, and I'm very small, and I love to dwell in lowly vales. So weak, the gilded butterfly scarce perches on my head, yet I am visited from heaven, and he that smiles on all walks in the valley, and each morn over me spreads his hand, saying, rejoice, thou humble grass, thou newborn lily flower. Though gentle maid of silent valleys and of modest brooks, for thou shalt be clothed in light, and fed with morning manna, till summer's heat melts thee beside the fountains and the springs, to flourish in eternal fields. Then why should Thel complain? Why should the mistress of vales of Har utter a sigh? And then the says, are you happy with that destiny to become the food of lambs? And then the vegetation says, oh yes, there's no greater honor than to be eaten by the Lamb of God. But then we get all the way to the end. And so he goes through lambs and clouds and all these transient parts of life that are here and then gone. And then the worm is talking to the cloud or the clod of clay. And then this is the one I thought is famous. The clod of clay heard the worm's voice and raised her pitying head. She bowed over the weeping infant, and her life exhaled. In milky fondness, then, on Thel, she fixed her humble eyes. O beauty of the vales of Har, we live not for ourselves. Thou seest me the meanest thing, and so I am indeed. My bosom of itself is cold, and of itself is dark. But he that loves the lowly pours his oil upon my head, and kisses me, and binds his nuptial bonds around my breast, and says, thou mother of my children, I have loved thee, and I have given thee a crown that none can take away. But how this is, sweet maid, I know not and cannot know. I ponder and I cannot know, and yet I live and love. The daughter of beauty, wiping her pitying tears with her white veil, and said, alas, I knew not this, and therefore I did weep. That God would love a worm I knew, and punish the evil foot that willfully bruised its helpless form. But that he cherished it, I never knew that, and so I wept. And so then the end of the story is the angel is showing her the world because she says she's willing to be born now, even though life is transient. And he takes her and shows her grave where she's going to be buried. And it so terrifies her that she runs back into heaven. Mm-hmm. And that's how Blake came to use the death of his daughter as poetry, but also use poetry as a way of meditating and coming to grips with the meaning of the death of his child.
Wow.
And that's great literature of a level that it took 100 years after he died for people to take him seriously because it seemed too crazy. We didn't have symbolism yet. We didn't have Wasteland. So yeah.
I'm processing what I just heard. So the lily and the worm, it sounds like they're glorifying God. Like they're saying that this existence in this presence and in this love is worth it. Did I hear that correctly?
Exactly. Yeah.
They're like reflecting just to exist in this love and this presence is absolutely delightful.
Yes. And this is the one that I wanted to.
I'm sorry, still slow down.
Okay.
The worm talking made me think like it almost takes imagination to imagine God's love like that.
Oh, yes.
And that's what Blake is saying.
Mm-hmm.
Because you couldn't experience all that he just said with these lowly creatures with such a high view of God without an imagination. You couldn't write that.
Yes.
And what you capture with that imagination is absolutely profoundly making God's love more real than me reading you out of John 3:16.
Yes. Yes. You feel it. It's emotional. It doesn't speak to one dimension of the mind. It doesn't just speak to reason.
So that's what Blake is saying. And what is that difference? It's the art of life is necessary to understand life.
Yes,
which
speaks
is what he's
to,
saying is imagination, that creative vision, that creative artistry.
yes, and beauty speaks to the soul. It speaks to both innocence and experience. The cloud and the lily are saying, we experience the world, we experience loss, and we can tell you it's worth it.
Yeah.
And the innocent don't know that. They don't know that. Where is it that he says, oh, I thought the line, I think maybe it's in the Marriage of Heaven and Hell, where he says, we are put on earth a little while to bear the beams of love.
Vision for life. That's prophetic right there, because we live in a time where people have completely lost that. Even religious people have lost that simple beauty. Like, just to exist, just to get to experience the love of God itself is the gift of life.
Yes, true that.
And a secular person, what is their view? It's like life is, they think that most of my friends who would be not of faith would think life is beautiful. There's a lot of beauty in life. There's a lot of negative and darkness and horrible stuff also. I don't know if that's there for a lot of people.
And also, it gives birth to this inability to handle the impermanence of things and a desire to create everlasting physical life, chirogenics, and the technological hope that someday we'll be able to tweak our DNA and live forever physically is a dream born of the Enlightenment. That reason and science will ultimately solve all our problems through technology, but it doesn't.
I don't mean to be crass, but it's kind of like
Yeah.
the orgasm of the Enlightenment.
Yes.
The climax is leading up to eternal life by science.
Yes. It can't imagine the problems that would give birth to. Everlasting life equals everlasting, can in some instances mean everlasting pain, everlasting loneliness,
Yeah.
unless love accompanies it. This isn't Blake, but I saw an interview with Mother Teresa when she won the Nobel Peace Prize. And they had her on with a chemist who had from Canada, who had won the Nobel Prize for chemistry. The announcer was trying to create conflict because that's what you do on TV. The announcer said to the chemist, you're in your laboratory and your researches may someday make possible everlasting life, physical, everlasting life. And yet, Mother Teresa, you believe in everlasting life, but it's not physical, it's spiritual. So this chemist providing us with real everlasting life. And Sister or Mother Teresa says, I believe in love and compassion. That was her answer. So
That's
it's
cool.
like everlasting life doesn't mean much if you don't have love and compassion.
Yeah.
The songs of innocence are great, but I'm grown up enough to know the songs of experience too. And I'm also enough of a poet to imagine their synthesis in the marriage of heaven and hell as envisioned in the Gospels. And that's the story I tell that, well, how did he put it in the beginning of Milton? Justify the ways of God to man. And what Mother Teresa is saying, it's the classic enlightenment meets mysticism or faith or the human imagination. I don't think she's saying, I believe in God, and so therefore you shouldn't be looking for everlasting life. I think she's saying everlasting life can be good or it can be bad, depending upon if we love and have compassion or if we don't, if we hate. And
Yeah.
so I think and
Um,
Blake is
I,
there.
I, I got to interject right now. The fact that I mentioned to you before that C.S. Lewis wrote The Great Divorce in response to Blake's Marriage of Heaven and Hell. In the story, people are getting on a bus from a place that's drab. It's like suburban that has spread out to where
Yeah.
everyone can't stand each other.
Yeah.
And so they've moved farther and farther apart. And all they do is continue whatever their thing was on earth. So they're still saying, they're still complaining about their ex-husband, or they're still complaining about everything, the government. They put us out here on these lots and they're getting farther and farther apart, but I don't want to be around anyone anyway. So everyone's turning into like a murmuring loop, like a loop.
Yeah.
And every day this bus picks them up and takes them over to this place where the solid people are. And the grass feels like crystals stabbing their feet, and they're like, they can't enjoy it.
Yes.
Because they're so stuck in hell of their own volition. It related to one of C.S. Lewis's quotes, hell's doors locked from the inside. So people in the Great Divorce are choosing continually to stay in their own hell. And it's actually probably not that far from the truth in reality. And that's what Blake was probably saying when he said he didn't believe in hell. He's probably saying hell is what we're doing to ourselves literally all the time, and what mankind does to itself, to each other.
I can imagine material, physical, everlasting life. The question is, where are you going to spend it, in heaven or hell?
Yeah, where you hate everyone and everyone annoys you. He has a poem called Dark Satanic Mills.
Uh-huh.
And it says that Blake wrote this, and it brought the phrase into the English language from his poem. It's often interpreted as referring to the early Industrial Revolution and its destruction, and Industrial Revolution's destruction of nature and human relationships.
Exactly.
Blake wrote that back in 1700s.
Well,
or,
and you can,
right around the turn of 1800, maybe.
Well,
1791. That mill burned by fire. It was right by his house.
It turns out he has the words for our reality.
He's way ahead of his time, is what we're saying.
Now, I wanted to read this at the beginning. I didn't get a chance to. This is from Subversive Orthodoxy. It's a quote from a fellow named Jim Christie, who wrote a book called The Long, Slow Death of Jack Kerouac. We'll probably talk about Kerouac's Catholicism someday, but this is what Jim Christie, that I quoted from the beginning, he says in this chapter about Blake and Goethe. The toughest struggle of all is to try and meld the sacred and the profane, the natural and the supernatural, this world and the next. Admit to this preoccupation, and you're in deep trouble with your church and your state. Try to make a record of it, as did St. Augustine or John of the Cross or William Blake, and you're scorned and perhaps imprisoned by your contemporaries, even if later generations regard you, without actually reading you, as a classic.
Usually without reading you, as a classic.
Yeah. But now we were going to talk about the 60s beat rediscovery of Blake.
Yeah, it just relates to his relevance. They started to find it again in the 60s, obviously. Well, and it probably points to his madness too, because those were considered by, your yuppies in the 80s.
Squares.
70s. Squares. Yeah. The squares would have thought, oh, they like Blake because Blake's mad too, like them, like the beatniks and such.
Yeah.
The squares,
The hipsters evolved into the hippies, but Ginsberg made Blake famous again. I think Dylan found Blake through Ginsberg and the Beats. And the Doors named their group from Blake's line about the doors of perception. If the doors of perception were cleansed, things would appear as they really are, infinite. And so that became why the Doors picked their name. But Blake
also, one more contemporary reference was U2 named a more recent album Songs of Innocence.
There you go.
I just discovered again. I saw the album title and I didn't know much about Blake, so that's obviously a reference or an allusion.
And then Ginsberg became famous with his breakout poem Howl. And Howl has a section in it where he talks about the reign of Moloch, the monster that devoured, the Philistine monster that devoured children, that is described in the Old Testament.
They would sacrifice babies too.
Yeah, which is a direct riff on Blake, used as an image in contemporary poetry.
Yeah.
And after he everybody was interested in this new oral poetry that sounded more like music. and rapping that they didn't call it rapping then, but sounding more like oral poetry and song than the kind of poetry that shows up in literary journals that you read silently in coffee shops.
Yeah.
So they asked him where he got it, and he said that he had been visited by William Blake in his dorm room at Columbia, where he was writing poetry, and Blake's voice appeared in the room and recited The Poison Rose, which was one of the poems in the Songs of Experience, The Lost Little Girl, which was also in Songs of Experience, and one other one. I don't know what the other one was now. But he said he actually heard his voice and that he had this vision. And that was what inspired him to write Howl as a visionary, prophetic poem of contemporary America, written with the same sort of spiritual reach as William Blake did in his prophetic poems.
That's cool.
So that's where that came from.
I didn't
And
know that. I didn't know that he claimed to have heard Blake talking in his room.
yeah, and he later Ginsberg wrote music to Songs of Innocence and Experience and recorded an album of him singing it
Really?
and reciting it. And you can go online and you can see Blake. I mean, you could see Ginsberg singing and reciting Songs of Innocence and Experience. And he even gives, after some of the poems, he even gives commentary. Like the two most famous poems in the Songs of Innocence and Experience are the signature poems, "The Lamb" in the Innocence and "The Tiger" in Experience. And "The Lamb" is a poem in the voice of a little child who is playing with a little lamb and is asking the lamb if the lamb knows who he is. And then after the lamb doesn't only responds with baaing, he explains that he is a divine creature whom God was made in the image of the lamb, becomes famous for being an image for God. Right. Then in the tiger poem, it's just all questions. That's the experience poem. And so the image of the tiger is this image of violence, carnivorousness, survival energy, the ability to survive, and these lines at the end: when the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? Tiger burning bright in the forest of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry?
Hmm.
So it ends with those powerful questions about where evil comes from. Now, Ginsberg, I watched him read that the other day because I knew we were going to talk about Blake. And he says that that poem, "Who Made You," is the tiger poem. The rhythm is different than the rhythms in some of the poems of Innocence, in that it has a trochaic rhythm, soft, hard, that da 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 da, which imitates the human heart. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? Where did this come from? This kind of energy. And Blake thinks the human imagination helps shape that kind of energy, as well as the human imagination helped shape the lamb as a symbol of God. And so getting that both those poems are showing us two facets of the human soul, two capacities we have, and not necessarily attributes of God that we know intellectually, but actually was the way Blake took it, which I thought was very interesting because I had never taken it that way. I've always, like a lot of people, puzzled over why the tiger has questions and the lamb has answers. And when he's talking about immortals, Blake is often talking about human beings. For him, the human soul is immortal. So
I'm not sure what you just said, but it triggered a thought of it would take imagination to think, did God give each human a portion of himself, parceling it out to where they have to be in unity to create the whole,
I think
if nothing else?
that's what it is. It's, if nothing else, a meditation. It's an imaginary conceit that is not literally true, but helps you understand something about your relationship to God and other people.
Yeah.
And it's only if you
That's what
don't.
imagination does.
Same with poetry. It's not, do you believe the poetry? Well, I believe the poetry throws light on human experience. I don't believe that it's necessarily literal science, although it turns out that a lot of the things that Blake said are closer to the social, political, and scientific reality now than they were when he wrote them. It's like these things catch up with the imagination. He even views history that way, that history doesn't unfold logically. It's a series of imaginative forces that sort of rendezvous with their times and make things over in their own image and then disappear and then are replaced by other imaginative images and agendas. And to understand these things, it would be nice if you had a science of politics. That's what Marx was all about. But he thought the only thing Marx said correctly, the Ginsburg, that is, not Blake, was that religion could be an opiate of the masses if it was not seen as a inspiration to a greater spiritual and liberated life of equality amongst all creation. That's why the poetry is gets hard to understand if you want it to be literal truth. But once you realize that this is a different game that Dellin and Ginsburg and Blake are playing, and it's called symbolism, and it's addressed to your heart, not to your head, but it's also addressed to your head, and that's why it's so powerful.
It's probably because these guys knew it's easier to get to the head through the heart.
Yeah, you're right.
I get to create a quote on Brainy Quotes.
You get to write your own proverbs from.
It's easier to get to the head through the heart than it is to get to the heart through the head. It's probably
Yeah,
very true. A
yeah.
truism. When the stars threw down their spears, watered heaven with their tears before words were spoken, before eternity. That was from a Five Iron Frenzy song, a band I followed in the early 2000s.
There's Blake influence again.
Direct quote.
Yeah.
Didn't know that wasn't his writing.
We're hoping you'd pick up on the Blakean reference.
Two last stories before we wrap this up.
Okay.
You said Blake, a couple of your notes, Blake's relationship to British radicals and ravers, antinomianism, Muggletonians, Seekers, and then the Thomas Paine story.
Okay.
Whatever you think's worth it there. And you also did say some connection to Marvel Universe of four Zoas.
I thought that if you wanted a way of understanding the longer poems, like the Four Zoas, where he creates mythological characters, and these mythological characters stand for psychological states.
Okay.
So, like, your reason is your reason, and represents that calculative measurement engineering side, right? We talked about that. Loss, LOS, represents the imagination. And you could see Marvel characters as representing different kind of forces in the universe. Like Iron Man is the technologist, and Spider-Man is the teenage Avenger, and Batman is the intellectual detective. And then they have these counter forces, which are super villains. like Dr. Octopus, and who represents this 8-armed technological leviathan out to destroy. And so you can work out when the Marvel comic books play their stories out, they work out these sort of mythological clashes between the teenager Spider-Man and the corrupt octopus man or wherever he was. And it takes on a kind of symbolic meaning that in the best comic books or in the best graphic novels become like they create their own mythological view of our time, right? Our history or what's happening now. Like Black Panther was a utopian society that was revealing the things that are lacking in our society. And Blake's longer poems do that. Not all the lines for us make sense, but occasionally you'll hit those lines like the ones I read. And if you stick with the story long enough and you pick up what's going on, then they're very powerful, like Dylan songs. Like once you get what that song is about, you get the sort of some of the images to It's All Right, Ma, for example.
Yeah.
Then the whole thing unfolds for you, and you just feel it on multiple levels. And if you need help with Blake, and everybody needs help with Blake, there is a Blake dictionary by the guy who wrote the first great work on Blake, Foster Damon, called A Blake Dictionary, The Ideas and Symbols of William Blake. And you can get that. And there's another book that just came out on William Blake's biography called William Blake versus the World by a guy named Higgins, I think. Let me see that. John Higgs. And that's new. And he's got some interesting descriptions of the Omian riots that took place by these renegade renegade Protestant sects that were rioting against the Catholic king. And some of them, the antinomians, they believed that once you were saved, you were free from any responsibilities to the law at all, which meant that you could commit any crime, you could do any deed as long as you were with Jesus. And so they were this extreme group. And occasionally people would attribute Blake to those groups, saying that he was like the
Muggletonians.
Muggletonians. And the Muggletonians was one of the antinomian groups that believed that they did not have to follow any laws because they had been saved.
Christian anarchists.
Christian anarchists of an extreme degree, yes. And in this book, they describe like how in their riots, for example, they would go to sermons in which the Muggletonian leader would swear the entire time, 4-letter words the entire time, just to show that he was free of any law. Or they would speak in insults and put downs because they wanted to show that they had been freed from the law by the New Testament. And of course, Blake is saying something similar. He's saying you're freed from the old law and the side of experience that has no pity, but you're not free to just do whatever you want. This isn't, So he was never antinomian, even though he got charged by that by some people because he seemed so crazy or open to writing these poems about, creatures that don't really exist. But that's fiction in the same allegorical fiction in the same way that C.S. Lewis wrote his sci-fi stuff. Did Tolkien wrote his fantasy stories. It's not antinomianism. But there are some great descriptions in this book, William Blake versus the World, of antinomian riots that sound very similar to riots we've experienced with people wearing strange costumes and prophesying their freedom over the law of the land. And it's reassuring to know where that came from and know that it didn't last more than maybe half a generation and it was gone.
Okay, let's pause for a second.
Yeah. This is a quote from William Blake versus the World by John Higgs. Blake's central argument that imagination is divine can't be ruled out or dismissed as easily as his views on nature and even reason. His position is not argued in the language of his opponent with logical proofs and measurements of matter. Instead, he presents his body of work and awaits our artistic reaction. That work is an illustration of the experience of the imagination as a far deeper and more overwhelming level than most of us are familiar with. Like early explorers returning from their ocean voyages with exotic plants and strange beasts, or Apollo astronauts returning to Earth with a case full of moon rocks, he's traveled to inner places that we knew nothing about and returned with exhibits to convince the skeptical. When we see his images or hear his words, what exactly attracts us to them? They're strange and powerful, and we can't claim to fully understand them. Yet they resonate with us as if they wake up something inside. They are not from our world, as we do not see their like elsewhere. It is our reaction to them that convinces us, after all, haven't we all dipped our toes into the sea of the imagination? Should it surprise us that others have dived much deeper? The human mind is the one thing that emits imagination into our closed, limited, finite universe. It's we and we alone who are the source of meaning, purpose, love, and hate in this otherwise cold, dead cloud of matter. If our eyes have evolved to see the light of the imagination rather than sunlight, then we would see ourselves as part of the constellations of the heavens down here on Earth rather than up in the night sky. We are the source of what we perceive. We are that which we crave. We might argue about the semantics of a word like divine to describe this, but it's certainly true that many will reject such a word for deeply ingrained cultural reasons. So that's, as John Higgs, it's just a year old, so it's interesting to see a guy who's one of our contemporaries coming to see Blake with contemporary eyes.
Yeah. I think you sold me on Blake, and I really get what he means about imagination now a lot better, and how it's actually a spiritual necessity.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think really the church even believes that currently.
Or ever really totally understood that. All the great art.
No, I think pre Blake's time with the
Post-Enlightenment
sciences.
is, and these are the figures we're dealing with. We're dealing with the Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment figures. That's why when we get to Goethe, you're going to see another genius who's saying, wait a minute, this new Enlightenment, as rational and as powerful as it is in sorting out our false superstitions and our maybe immature use of the imagination, we still haven't had a critique of a mature use of the imagination in art, literature, and philosophy. And that's going to be left to me as the king of the German romantic naturalists.
You mean
And
Goethe was thinking that?
yeah, what he comes up with is looking at his own life. It becomes the autobiography of a spiritual psychology of how his faith was both challenged and then renewed, and then challenged again and then renewed again, and all the different phases that he went into that became for him what he called the Bildungsroman, which was the novel of development, which is the novel as spiritual story of, or another way of putting it, the novel as the inner life, the story of the inner life, because the story of the inner life is not being told in our culture at large for the most part. Or if it is, it's being told in such a reductive, political, and moralistic way that its beauty and its power and its reach aren't appreciated.
Mm.
At least not
Well,
as well as the Bach music or Beethoven did.
so yeah, these 2 episodes are going to be focusing on Blake, and then as Professor was just alluding, we'll be moving on to Goethe next and finding what he's got to offer us, which I think Blake delivered. So
Yeah.
thank you so much, Professor.
Okay, thank
We'll
you.
talk to you soon.
All right, adios.
Bye-bye. And that concludes this episode. I think there may be something in here for all of you, each of you, whether you're a skeptic, a believer, or somewhere in between on your own deconstruction journey. We're going to be exploring what it means to live a life of deep meaning in a world that often feels fragmented and nihilistic. And this revelatory faith doesn't seem to come to us from the expected places. The prophetic voice doesn't seem to come from the pulpits or the seminaries. It's breaking through in novels, poetry, activism, art, and the unexpected corners of culture. We hope you'll join us on this ongoing conversation. Until then, thank you for listening to the Subversive Orthodoxy podcast. If you found this meaningful, please leave a 5-star review, subscribe, and share with anyone who might resonate with this conversation. Adios.
Spiritually, I wanna jump off a cliff without a parachute, like I'm high on cannabis, and skip through fields naked, like I wonder if I could drift, or if I could drift through it, dancing through moonlight under nighttime skies, forgetting the world.
This has been the Subversive Orthodoxy podcast with Travis Mullen and Professor Inchausti.
Say hi to human beings with a smile unseen, grabbing wildflowers as I slide down hills.